When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of A Mom for All. Thanks for being here today. As you may know, if you saw our first episode, this is a show for youth who may identify as GLBTQIAP, or it could be even for people in their lives who want to support them. I don't know when you may be watching this because it may be around for a long time. However, letting you know that we are taping this still during the pandemic when we're all sheltered in place. And so my guest today will be speaking to us from his home, and I'm speaking to you from my home. And we're going to cover a lot of subjects today. In fact, the main topic that we're going to focus on is religion, but possibly from a particular bent today. And then on other days, we'll have experts who come from other religious perspectives. The reason that I chose religion as one of the first topics I wanted to cover is that I feel that some youth who are struggling with their own identities and accepting themselves and getting support from the people around them sometimes have the biggest challenges when it comes to religion. Perhaps they've been brought up in a certain religion, perhaps their family has certain beliefs, perhaps even the church they go to with their family, maybe a minister is saying certain things that makes them feel uncomfortable or that they're not allowed to be who they are. So I thought this was a good place to start. And of course, you can always watch our episodes in any order you want, but let's go on and start talking a bit about religion. And I want to introduce you to a longtime friend and someone I admire greatly. And I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about himself because it would take the whole show if I really listed his whole bio and credits and all of that. So I'll let him decide what he wants to share about who he is, and then we'll go into some questions. So let me introduce you to the Reverend Duncan Teague. Welcome, Duncan.
Hi, Sheri. Thank you for having me.
Of course. How would you like to introduce yourself to this audience of who we presume to be youth and perhaps parents or other supportive adults or adults attempting to be supportive? How would you like to introduce yourself and your background?
Sure. I am founder and minister at Abundant Love Unitarian Universalist congregation of West End, Atlanta. We are an emerging Unitarian Universalist congregation. We celebrated our our second anniversary on March 1st, just before the sheltering at home took place. Wow. So we had a big celebration, and we're a small congregation, but we are growing, and I think we're doing good work where we are planted. The Unitarian Universalist congregations that are surrounding the Atlanta area are predominantly north of the city, and are then further out in the suburbs and also in Athens. And then to go south from downtown Atlanta, you have our congregation, and the next one south is Macon, and the next one south after that is Columbus, Georgia. So we have a big area of Atlanta to work in and to be a part of, and we're really happy that we're there. Also, I think that because of the focus of your program, which I think is really needed, I need to let folks know that I am older, middle-aged now. How about that? We'll say that.
I'll go with that.
Yeah, because you can't be 50 for 15 years, huh? But anyway, I came out to myself way back in 1978,
right,
when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know what it's like to be a young person coping with high school and with all the things that it means to grow up, and also to come to terms with your sexuality. I'm also the oldest child of Reverend and Mrs. Russell Teague And so I grew up very much in the National Missionary Baptist Church faith. And I'm very proud of that upbringing, but I know what it meant for me to wrestle with becoming a gay man and growing up in that community. So I think that's how I want to introduce myself. I did finish college, and I have a degree that ministers get called a Master of Divinity degree. Me and Sheri are theater people, so my undergraduate degree was in theater. And both of those schools had religious affiliations. So I know what it's like to grow up surrounded by faith and religion. Yeah.
So since you were being brought up in a Christian, right? Christian faith,
Yeah.
Christian church.
Missionary Baptist.
Right.
You can't get more Christian.
And
I was not sprinkled, I was dunked.
and I suppose either exclusively or predominantly African American, is that accurate?
Yes, it was, we worshiped once a year with a white Baptist congregation.
Okay.
The rest of my upbringing and my church life was all in the Black community in Kansas City, Missouri.
So by the time you were realizing who you were and coming out, what messages had you already been taught about being gay?
Well, it was interesting because there are the cultural messages which you couldn't get away from. And also, my mother chose to send us to a Lutheran grade school that was integrated. And then me and my brother both went to a Catholic high school that was integrated.
Okay.
So I got the plethora of Christian messages around not only my sexuality, but sex, period. And to be honest, in the 70s, a lot of what we heard mid to late 70s was not a lot. The first time I heard a homophobic sermon in my church, I was very grown.
Oh, wow.
I knew the attitudes that they had about people who were gay or queer or different or sexual minorities. I knew that those attitudes because that was taught explicitly through the way people talked about folks, the way we treated people who were gay. But I didn't get a lot of homophobic messages. Those became popular in the church much later, and especially during the HIV and AIDS crisis, in the early days of the epidemic.
Okay, interesting. I would have actually thought that you would have gotten stronger messages earlier on from the sermons.
No, the message was that we didn't need to have sex, period.
Okay. Absolutely.
That was the Christian message, and they stopped at that message. And it's kind of sad because I saw not just myself struggling sexually, but I saw my cousins struggling as heterosexuals in the 70s, trying to cope with all the different kinds of messages and the maybe second generation of women, and especially younger women who had access to the birth control pill.
Okay.
What did that mean? So what I was sad about, especially in my young adult life, was when we were trying to give messages to protect people about HIV, and they hadn't been given adequate sexual health messages. By the way, I want to say, as a Unitarian Universalist, one of the things I'm most proud of is our sexual education curriculum, Our Whole Lives, or OWL, which now is formulated not only for young people, but we have curriculums for people over 50.
Oh,
so
wow.
from cradle to the nursing home, we talk about sex. It is developmentally appropriate, and it's really good education.
That's fabulous. Excuse me. We sent our own boys who are now 21 and 18, but we sent them through as many years of the OWL program as they were willing to do. But I always felt so good about it.
Well, now they have a program for you and your husband.
That's great. We could use it too. We'll have to, at the end of the show, I'll make sure that we put some resource links about how folks could order it, maybe from UUA in Boston or something, if they're not close to a congregation, you know.
The OWL curriculum is available through some United Christian churches,
Okay.
UCCs, and it is also available as a participant in the program through Unitarian Universalist congregations.
Okay.
We are careful with the curriculum because we got some backlash. Parts of it were wrongly distributed. So I would contact a Unitarian Universalist congregation in your area and ask them, when are they hosting an OWL program?
Okay.
And say you're willing to support it.
That's fabulous. What do you remember from growing up in that environment? Where did you then find support? Where did you feel safe to be yourself and discover yourself and eventually come out to yourself and to others? What was that process and journey like?
I was really fortunate because, and I'm going to get emotional because she's now deceased, but one of our best friends was actually the mother of children we grew up with in school, the Clarks. And Mrs. Clark was a stay-at-home mom after her youngest child grew up. And Mrs. Clark welcomed me into her kitchen, as she did everybody. She had 4 sons, and they were very popular, and they had a lot of friends, and they had a basketball court in the back and a pool. And so the house was full of kids all the time and family, and they had a big family. But at Mrs. Clark's house, as a teenager, I was welcome to be Duncan. And I didn't have to edit myself. I didn't have to change who I was. And I don't even think I had to come out to her. Of course, it was kind of obvious, but in that space, I was loved and cared for by a friend's mom who was not freaked out by the fact that I was gay. I wasn't the first gay person she met. She knew I wasn't going to be the last gay person she would meet. And she had grown up in Kansas City. So in that way, I was safe in that way, and I had support from right after I came out. I also have to say a big thank you to my cousin Laverne, who's old enough to be my mom, but she was a part of our family. When she graduated high school, she moved in with my parents, and she's always been there. And Laverne has a daughter who is like my little sister, LaTanya. And Laverne has always been completely loving and welcoming to me. And I'm not saying that Laverne loved the fact that I was gay or liked it, but she loved me, and she still does. And she's still supportive, and she was at my ordination, and she and her daughter have traveled with me and my longtime partner, my husband, David. And as long as I'm mentioning David, I need to say out loud that you can find somebody who loves you and that you love and be with them a long time. David and I have been together 26 and a half years.
And I had the pleasure of being at your wedding, and I had the pleasure of being at your ordination service as well. And actually today, the day that we're taping this, it's called Loving Day, which is historically the day that interracial marriage became legal in the United States. And since
and that was not in the 1800s, it was in the 1960s.
Right.
Yeah.
And they even, the audience can't see your husband, but you are in an interracial marriage. So
Yes.
There's so many things that we can talk to you about that you are an expert on, and we may have you back for other shows. But could you have imagined when you were a young first coming out person, or even before coming out, that you would ever be able to be in a relationship like this and such a stable life, such a wonderful life. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Actually, I could. And I'm sort of an odd case because I was a boob tube baby. I was in front of the television way too much. And something that we don't remember historically is that, so the gay rights movement starts to take a form and a shape. It had been going on for a very long time, but it starts to take shape in the late 60s, and especially after the protest in Los Angeles, and then in the reaction to what I call police riots on our community in New York during Stonewall in about 69. So by 79, when I am a teenager, there are already television programs that feature gay characters. And gay characters, a few of whom are not just suicidal, not just depressed, but some of them are actually in relationships. And I honed in on that information. And I think what actually happened in television, because we were on Maude, we were on All in the Family, there were transgender characters on television. They certainly wouldn't have been exemplary, maybe, to our eyes now, but they were present. And I think that as we start to get into the early days of the AIDS epidemic, that we actually suffered a backlash, and that gay characters sort of slid to the background, and they certainly weren't like Ellen. But we were present in the 70s in a way that I recognized. And so I thought, because I did come out in high school, and let's face it, we all come out sexually in high school, or a lot of us, especially heterosexuals. And so I was coming out sexually with my peers. And my peers were thinking about when they were going to have kids and when they were going to get married. And I naively, despite all the oppression that was going on, thought the same things. Like, oh, okay, so I'm just gay, but I want to be with a long-time partner. And maybe someday we can figure out a way to have kids, maybe. Because I wanted 4 kids.
Wow. Well, you and David did not have kids, but I've heard you speak of some people in your life who,
oh my God,
I feel that you have parented and fathered.
Oh my God.
Right?
Yes.
So
by the time I got with David,
did you have did you decide not to have children at a certain point, or was it just the way that life took you? And then however that happened, how did you develop a family of almost children anyway?
So I went to New Pacific Academy as a young adult in California. So I was in San Francisco for a month with 100 young gay activists for a month. And it was the month that the World AIDS Conference was in San Francisco. And because of that, there were a lot of other world events happening in the queer and in the AIDS affected communities in San Francisco that month, that summer. So I had quite a whirlwind experience. And at one of the marches, we were marching about gay parents because there was legislation in some states talking about taking away our adoptive kids, or taking away the right for gay parents and lesbian parents and queer folks to adopt. And we were marching against it. And so in my head, I said, well, I'm going to be a gay dad. And that's what was on my sign. And I sort of put that message in my heart. By the time I met David, I was older, and David is a few years older than me. And we chose not to pursue our own children. That's what we decided as a couple, because he had already helped raise his 2 nephews who were almost adults then. And I thought, well, okay, I'll accept that. And a few years later, when I really started to get a notion about what it means to raise infants, I was kind of happy. Uh,
You didn't miss
the 2 o'clock and the 4 o'clock in the morning feedings, and what happens in grade school if things don't go well. And I thought, maybe we made the right choice. I jokingly say, though, that the universe had my order and wouldn't cancel it, because now 9 young adults have adopted David and I as like part of their parents.
Oh, wow.
And in one case, we really are parents to a young lady who we love and care for, because before she was 30 years old, she had lost both her parents because they were older when they had her. And so she lost her father in high school, and she lost her mother in graduate school. And she and I were actually in graduate school together, but we're old enough to be her parents. And she really is like a daughter to us.
Yeah.
And in the gay community, you know, you put together family that's supportive. And one of those people introduced me to David, and she was sort of a play daughter to me. Brooke Perry is her name. And Brooke is guilty for putting a lot of couples together.
Oh, nice.
So it's Brooke's fault. So those are the 2 women, and then there are 7 young men. But we did pretty good. One is a pathologist, one is a lawyer, one is an Episcopal priest, one is quite a singer and a performer, and he runs a clinic in Alabama. Our daughters are pretty successful too, and one daughter has even had children. I do not like the word grandpa, so we're trying to come up with a new word.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have, yeah, and the one who is a pathologist also has a baby.
Okay.
So yeah, so I have quite a family,
You
a
really-
chosen family.
Right. Well, so much of what we've talked about so far is about supportive people in your life in various
Yes.
ways. When you were
Yes.
younger, as you're older, creating a family in many ways. What if we can think about youth that are out there right now, and potentially even during this time of shelter in place and things, how can you suggest to them in the ways that might be available to them in more limited ways now, whatever, how can they develop, you know, some close relationships, some supportive people around them if they're feeling a lack of that, if they're not able to be at school with teachers now that may have, if there was a teacher who supported them, or, you know, if they don't have siblings who support them, or if their parents are making them feel wrong, or anything like that. Can you think of things that helped you through the years, even things maybe they
Sure.
can find these days on the internet, or books to read, or movies to watch, any of that were influential to you and helped you feel that you belonged? So gathering the people, but also gathering other resources. What comes to mind?
I want to go back before that though, because when I told Crystal Cherry Powell, and she and I were, she was the really cute girl in high school. There were many cute girls, in case there are high school friends of mine watching, and they're still cute. I saw them at our reunion, but Crystal Cherry was a really beautiful young lady in high school, and we were friends. And of course, I was friends with Tony Clark, Mrs. Clark's son. But before I got to Crystal and Tony to tell them what I knew inside, I had to look in the mirror. And I had to say to myself, you're gay. And I had to say it in a way that was not an accusation, but simply a statement of fact. And so if you're wrestling with your sexual orientation, your gender orientation, I'm going to ask that you find safe ways, private searches on the internet, and you know what's good and what's not. Find support for that moment when you need to tell yourself the truth about who you are. And then, and I'm going to get a little religious here, then ask the universe, ask God, whoever you believe in, if you're not religious, seek out the safe people for whom you can share that with. And you don't ever come out for someone else. You come out for yourself. So if it is dangerous, if it's dangerous, I am not recommending that you come out. There will be time for you to develop those friendships, those people who love and support you. And I did my whole story. If I came out in the 70s, I obviously didn't have the World Wide Web. That wasn't even a phrase yet. But I was able to find the people for whom I could come out to. A funny story is that I came out to Crystal in the cafeteria at school because she had spent the summer with her uncle in San Francisco. So I thought she knew a lot about being gay. And then I found out that years and years and years later, I said, Crystal, how did your gay uncle do in San Francisco? And she said, my uncle wasn't gay.
Oh my God.
So I'm glad I thought he was gay. But anyway, you know who in your life you can trust with that information, or who is loving and accepting and allows you to be who you are, because you will need that support just to get through life, and especially as a person of color. I am sorry that our church sort of had a gag order on sexuality, because that's where I got all the rest of my support. And you know if your church is a safe place, or your religious community, if you're not Christian, you know if it's a safe place for you to come out. And because you have the internet, you can explore like I did without the internet. And I discovered Metropolitan Community Christian Churches, which were founded before I even came out. And there was one in Kansas City, and as a young adult, this was after high school, I knew I could go to that gay church and get support. It wasn't a real religious home for me, because culturally it was so different from my church, but I at least knew that it was there and that there were people there for whom it was safe to talk to. And if in fact you have been struggling so much and the pressure is so hard on you that you have wanted to harm yourself, I am begging you to seek out the suicide prevention lines, the gay helplines, the gay community centers, and call and talk to somebody. I did when I was a teenager. It wasn't very helpful back then, but I at least had the number to call.
Okay.
We
have put, even on the first episode, at every episode at the end, we are putting those resource contact numbers for suicide hotlines and things like that. And it's not, it doesn't have to do with GLBTQIA youth needing to be higher suicide, threats. It's just that the way society treats people, it's that it's harder to find supportive adults or organizations. That's why we need these hotlines dedicated to the GLBT youth. So, I don't want parents out there or other adults to think, oh, well, I hope my child isn't gay because then they'll be suicidal. No, they don't have to be. They can be quite healthy and happy if given the right resources and support.
Yeah, my story includes the David Coupe story from way back then. He was the first NFL football player to come out, and he waited till he retired. He was quite young when he retired, But in the 70s, he wrote his story down. And in his story, his parents were devout Catholic and my parents were devout Baptist. And they acted exactly the same way when I came out to them. And I came out to my parents in the 80s while I was in college. So one of the things I'm recommending, and there are plenty of stories and books and podcasts and series available to help you get information about what it means to be gay now. The one book that I don't have a copy of, and I'm recommending this for not only youth out there who are listening to this program, but also to parents, is Loving Someone Gay. You can get a used copy. But it is a phenomenal book. It's old, it's real old, but it still is a wonderful resource for people who know someone in their family. It might not even be your child. It might be somebody close to you who is in the process of coming out. And Loving Someone Gay, do you remember who the author is, Sheri?
I don't offhand, but before we edit this, I'll find it and I'll put it up here on the screen.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to brag a little bit. If you're interested in the stories about African-American gay men in the South, Sweet Tea by E. Patrick Johnson, my story is in here, and about 60 other men across the Southeast are interviewed and in this book, and he did not write it in academic language. He actually didn't even clean up our language. So the way we talk is the way the book is written. And I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And soon there will also be Making Sweet Tea, the film, out. And there are stage productions where Patrick performs us on stage. And those productions are also called Sweet Tea. So however you can intersect with this information, it is entertaining, it's informative, and I'm very proud to be a part of it.
Absolutely. That's wonderful.
One of my good friends and one of my professors, No Ashes in the Fire, coming of age.
Hold them up a little bit higher, then we'll be able to really see.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Good, perfect.
No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America. It's by Darnell Moore. He has won awards. He has an interview with Trevor Noah. It is fabulous. And I have a feeling that for some people, this is going to be your David Coupe story. And he talks about his upbringing in an urban setting and being the smart Black gay guy. Fearless Dialogues is a book written by Dr. Ellison, Greg Ellison, and he does workshops on this about what it means to be a Black man right now in the 21st century. And this book is phenomenal. It's not specifically for gay boys or for the queer community, but I think it's powerful. What the Bible really has to say about homosexuality. If in fact you're a Christian and you are queer, or you have grown up in the Christian church and queer, you need this book. And Daniel Helminiak is a friend of mine. He is still teaching. He is amazing. It is not the easiest book to get through, but it will give you a lot of answers. And an African-American professor along the same lines wrote The Good Book, Reading the Bible with Mind and Heart, and it's by Peter Gomes. And I knew Peter, Dr. Peter Gomes, Reverend Dr. Peter Gomes. He was the chaplain at Harvard. He is wonderful, but it is written by the chaplain at Harvard. So this,
take that into consideration.
Keep that in. And from a straight Black woman who is 6 feet tall and gorgeous, and she decided that we needed a book written from the perspective of someone outside the community who's African American talking to gay and lesbian folks. And so it's real talk about LGBTQIAP folks by Tara Coit, and it's getting a lot of recognition. And I think it's getting recognition because though Tara is not queer, she is an excellent writer, an excellent viewer, and she lets us speak from our lives. And she didn't try to speak for us. And you can feel her concern and her care for the community. I think this would be an excellent book for parents.
And that, I think that is a brand new book, isn't it? I heard her interviewed.
It is brand new.
I heard her interviewed last week on Atlanta, the NPR station here, either by Rose Scott or by, anyway, by one of the hosts on there. I heard her interview.
Yeah.
Maybe
her last name is Coyt, if you want to look up one of her interviews. And she's available to talk about her book because it is so new. And she's still doing workshops and stuff on it. The last book is kind of old, and I know there's a new edition out. And if you're a member of the queer community, this should be on your shelf. Looking at Gay and Lesbian Life by Warren Bloomfield and Diane Raymond. I know Warren. He is a wonderful man, a wonderful historian. And this is all the gay and lesbian history that they could find. The new edition, of course, includes more stuff that you don't learn in school about our community. We didn't just show up at Stonewall. We didn't just show up in America. Queer folks have been a part of history for a very long time. And you won't be the first queer, you won't be the last. And so there's some history that you need to know to let yourself develop the pride and the love of who you are and your sexuality. And so that you can also know that, yes, you happen to have come out as bisexual. And you can also be an astronaut. You may feel like you're transgender and you have always wanted to be a doctor. Don't give it up. This is the time in history when we can push the boundaries of where we can go and what we can do in ways that were not true in history. And though it is not cost-free, you can do those things and be out. It is not cost-free. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But this is a point in history, especially as we are in the midst of this pandemic. We need all the brilliant hands on deck, regardless of who they sleep with, regardless of how they identify in gender. We need all the brilliant people helping us survive as a species that we can get.
Absolutely.
And also at this moment when we are raising up racial justice, as it is time now. It is time to do something about the bigotry and hatred, in particular focused on Black folks. But let's just get rid of it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I hope that was helpful.
Wow, you've said so many. You've gone through so many of the questions I had on my list without even my needing to ask them. But there's some things I want to kind of highlight and go back to when you talked about that you don't have to come out to everyone, that only come out to people that feel safe to you. And this was advice I gave several years ago, a group that I had started on one of the social media. I had started a page to be friendly to people from various backgrounds and things. And so someone from a country far, far away got in touch and decided to come out to me, even though we had never met. But a young man decided to come out to me as being gay. And then to also share with me that he was going to be coming out to everyone there. And the more we talked, I said, let me tell you something. Not everyone deserves your coming out to them because they're not making you safe yet. Because there were definitely dangers in his culture, as there are unfortunately everywhere, a certain amount, but really in his culture. And I said, don't feel that you have to come out to everyone because they don't deserve it, you know. And I think that's a gift to give to people. When you feel safe, when someone has made you feel safe, helped you feel safe, then of course fine to come out to them. And then obviously when you're older and have your support system around you, then you may feel more like being out publicly. But I think for young people, to choose carefully who they come out to, and it doesn't have to be everyone. And so that supports what you were saying earlier. And I also, an idea that or something that I've used in the past when I've not been in a situation where I want to necessarily come out myself or out anyone else in my family or friend circles, but if I might be wearing a particular piece of jewelry or have a book in my hand, and someone asks about it, I think, okay, am I telling them that this is about me or this person in my life? Or am I saying, what I would often say is, well, you know, I have friends and family members that I care about a lot and I'm trying to learn more about it. So even with the book, if a young person hasn't come out to everyone in their life and they're carrying a book around, that's okay. If someone asks them about it, they might say, yeah, I have a friend that I'm really trying to support, and that's why I'm reading this book. They don't have to say that it's for them or their sibling or something. So that's just an idea that has served me. Sometimes when I'm in the school systems, that's a bit of an issue. I don't know what's safe to talk about or not, but I will go on and say, I'll make the point, yes, I have friends and family members who are affected by this, so I care about it a lot. It's a way that you can still have the discussion without outing oneself or someone else, right?
And Sheri, we're being very old-fashioned in this because nowadays there are safe havens for queer and gender non-conforming kids in the schools, in some schools, if you're fortunate enough to have that,
right?
I would say find a way to safely engage with that, or at least make use of the information they have. If you don't feel comfortable yet going to those meetings or being with those kids because they're too out or they're too whatever, don't let that information pass you by if you need it.
Right. Absolutely. But I also know that this show may be useful for youth in places where their schools definitely do not have safe clubs like this, or places at their places of worship or things. We are also in the future, I have some folks lined up from, I believe, every major world religion that I can think of, that will be talking, because some people think, oh, well, you can't be Muslim and be bisexual, but I'm going to introduce you to someone who is, you know, outwardly and proudly. And so, you know, today is sort of our chance to talk a bit about Christian faith, even though I know Unitarian Universalist is a little bit betwixt and between in some ways, but we will have representatives from other faiths as well, so that youth and adults who are part of other faiths can see, oh, this is how in my own faith I can find support and find resources. And I did want to ask, well, there's so many things I want to ask you, but what are there from you or from the Bible, from Christian sources, have you found particular passages? Is there something that you're able to tell a student, a youth, to look at the Bible at this passage and you'll see, let's interpret it this way, because you'll see how open it is. Have you been able to do that?
Well, when I encountered MCC as a young adult, I was told some things that really sort of were very surprised. Okay, so this is back in the late 70s, early 80s, and I hadn't heard any of this in my own church. First of all, if you're a Christian, your Christian faith is based on primarily the life and times of Jesus, who is in the Christian faith considered Christ, the Savior. And it is interesting that in what we have of his story, what we have of Jesus' story, the important things that he addressed, not one line, not one verse condemning gay or lesbian people. Not one direct quote where Jesus stops and says, those queer people over there you need to hate. It is not in there. Now, there are scriptures based on Paul and the early church's interpretations about homosexuality or what we perceive them talking about in the scripture. It would take me a lot of time to go into technical stuff, but I want to just say that no one wants you to denounce or relinquish a Bible that's important to you. But it might be useful for you to look at the Bible as it is written, as a text that is acquired over thousands of years, with thousands of people's input into the text, and to consider that over history we have reinterpreted and reinterpreted and reinterpreted different scriptures in the Bible. There are scriptures in the Bible that condone slavery. There are scriptures in the Bible that condone having more than one wife, having many wives, because the Bible is also a reflection of the culture for which it was written in, and there are hundreds of cultures reflected in the Bible. So you might want to think, I wonder if this scripture is more cultural than spiritual. I just want to give you that to ponder. Mm-hmm. And that if the scripture, in fact, does not help you get closer to God, that you might want to look into it. You might want to examine and see what is available out there as far as interpretation, as far as historical references around that scripture.
Right.
And that's not just the few texts there are that concern same-sex attraction or same-sex behavior, but any scripture that sort of gets in the way of you being loving and kind and closer to God and closer to your neighbor, which is in there and which is a direct quote from Jesus, you might want to look at those.
Good points. The one of the books, one of the many books, and I love all those suggestions, the one about what the Bible really says about homosexuality, that was the one that I knew of, I don't know, a couple decades ago maybe, that everybody was passing around, and it was, yes. I think it was, a lot of people were giving it to their parents or their relatives and then having discussions based on it. So I know that at the time that was really considered a good resource for having those discussions for folks in the Christian faith, for sure.
And I am certain by now that Daniel Helminiak, the author, and that's Daniel Helminiak, has stuff on the internet. He's written other things that address the Bible, and he is quite a scholar. Right. So this is not somebody who is just basing his book on what he thought. He has done a lot of research to come up with his conclusions about especially those texts that are problematic for the GLBTQ community.
Right, exactly. Well, thank you for sharing all of those. I want to make sure that we're coming close on the time that I know you need.
Are we really? Oh, wow.
So I want to just sort of glance over my list here and just sort of take a moment of silence while I do that, and you think of things that you haven't had a chance to say, and let me see if there's some major areas that we haven't gotten to yet. One subject I see on here that I don't think we referred specifically to is bullying. A lot of a lot of youth are victims of bullying for various reasons. It doesn't seem to ever go away entirely. Um, I wonder if you had any personal stories about being bullied, about witnessing bullying, about how to react to that, and particularly for youth, how to handle it in the midst of all the other uncertainties and questions during adolescence. How does one handle bullies, and especially if it is dealing with a person's sexuality or perceived sexuality
Yeah.
and gender?
Um, First of all, I need to say something that bullying is really it's a sad reality of um, really immature, um, really childlike people. And in adulthood, we actually have laws that make that same behavior illegal. It's that bad. And it is not right that anyone should suffer behind that kind of behavior. If you are going through that, I can imagine that it feels like the whole world is against you. And I want to say, as sincerely as possible, they are not. And that very soon, whatever the issue is, as people grow up and they start to own their own lives, we hope they lose interest in bullying other people. Unfortunately, that isn't true. Having a sense of who you are and knowing that you were brought here to give exactly what you can give to this society, to the humanity, to your family in a way that nobody else can, and that please don't let what some, and forgive me, but some idiot at school, somebody on the internet, some of their absolutely horrendous behavior is them trying to have a fun time at your expense. I also want to say from this angle, with this gray hair, that I lived long enough to go to my 40th high school reunion. And I saw somebody who had bullied folks as a kid be extremely polite and extremely kind to several people for whom he made high school horrible. Because it's 40 years now later, and he understands, first of all, we don't have as much time as we did back then. But secondly, like, that's sick behavior. And he wants to be somebody else now. And it was interesting to watch some of his former victims cope with this very older, very mature man who also was grieving the loss of one of his dearest friends and how he had changed. I hope that you can get help with it now and understand that you are not defined by any group of kids, by anybody else outside of yourself. You are who you are. And Sheri and I love you.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you could think of, if there's anything that you haven't already said that would address an adult, let's say a parent at this point. A parent comes on here and sees this show and they're saying, hey, I think maybe I have a child who might be GLBTQ. I don't know anything about it. I don't know how to support them. What should I do? I don't have friends, we don't know anyone who's gone through this. What would be sort of the starting place that you could tell a parent like that?
The first place I want you to go as a parent is to understand that your first job as a parent is to love yourself. And to find the security and the love of who you are within yourself to such a degree that your children don't have to fill that for you. And so your children, regardless of their sexual orientation, can decide what makes them happy, what makes them successful, and you can find a way to support it if it's not endangering them. Now, I know you heard me say if it's not endangering them, and you're saying to yourself, but being gay or lesbian or whatever is a danger. It is innate to who we are. None of us chose this. And no amount of abuse, no amount of your discomfort will change it. It won't. And the resources that we've named over and over again, you have a responsibility to get those resources in the same way. And I'm not saying that this is makes us any less than because of our sexual orientation. I'm only using it as an example. But if you had a child who was deaf, you would want that child to have every advantage. And you would also invest in learning everything you could about having a deaf child, a differently abled child. And in as much as you love your child, if you know that, and you do know, if they're gay or lesbian or bisexual, possibly if they're transgender, but you know that it is your responsibility to love, care, and protect your child, regardless of any of that. And you'll need tools and you'll need information because unfortunately, the world doesn't know it yet, or most of the world doesn't. But the world has changed. Mm-hmm. And we no longer are considered half citizens at the Marriage License Bureau. Mm-hmm. So in your care for your child, become informed. And I'm not asking you to give up your faith. I'm not asking you to join PFLAG. I'm saying become informed. In the same way that you would want to become informed, whether in fact you learned American Sign Language or not, you would want to know everything you could possibly know about what it would take for a deaf child, a queer child, to grow up as healthy, as strong, as mighty as they could. And none of your dismay will change their sexual orientation. I hate to break it down like this, but nobody changed your sexual orientation and you can't change theirs.
Very good. Exactly. Wow. Thank you. There's a whole book, I think, within this past hour. Have you written a book?
Not yet. I'm in a lot of books. I said this was going to be the year for my first published solo poetry book. Let me take that back. I'm in a book of poetry with my fellow poets, Adodi Muse, a gay Negro ensemble.
Okay. Great, great. Well, I
hope this was going to be the year for that. And this has turned out to be the year for everything else. So we'll see.
Oh. A lot of time at home, right?
Yeah, there is a lot of time at home. And I have written a lot more than I thought I would.
Wonderful.
But we will see.
Well, I hope you take a lot of things that you said here today because they were just so eloquently expressed. And
thank you.
I hope they end up in a book. I hope a lot of people get to see this, and maybe we'll break it up into small bits. And I'll go on and say goodbye to our audience, and then then we'll say goodbye. Okay. Is there anything else you would like to say before we do that part?
I'm happy that I have made it to this point where I can proudly sit here comfortably talk about my sexuality, and it took a long time for me to get here. And I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I'm loved and supported by my husband, by my family of choice, my family, my biological family. Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad I have good old friends like you, Sheri, doing this good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to have you in my life and to have you again in my life. I want to come to your services more at your congregation too.
Thank
I
you.
really enjoyed that the last time. So
And to know your kids before they were here. Oh
that's
my.
right. Yeah, that's right. And talk about a parent not knowing who their children is going to be and just trying to support them and love them and watch them change the world, you know? So, well, thank you for all your support. Thank you for being here today. And I'll say goodbye to our audience for today. And we'll make sure that when you're seeing this, that there are some various resources here at the end that will lead you to other things to read and learn. And we'll see you next time. Take care and love yourself. Bye-bye.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be.